You probably don't know all of this. But trust me, the Arabs do, the people in Palestine do, the Muslims do. Deeply, and they know this like you know 9/11. As the end of the British Mandate approached, the British Army started withdrawing from Palestine, allowing the Jews to execute Plan Dalais, the culmination of a carefully designed purge of Arabs that had been in development for decades. Beginning in December 1947, several days after the UN resolution was adopted, the Jewish army started to attack Arab settlements, surrounding them on 3 flanks and leaving the 4th open for evacuation. Massacres ensued whenever this tactic didn't work, and evidence suggests that some of the slaughters were intentional. Israel concealed these crimes for decades, but evidence slowly started leaking out of the state archives, fleshing out the testimonials of countless Palestinians. However, Israeli scholars who exposed the truth about the ethnic cleansing were largely ignored by Western media, which loves to, of course, simplify everything it can get its claws on. Israeli historian Ilan Pappé described the massacre that took place in the village of Deir Yassin. As they burst into the village, the Jewish soldiers sprayed the houses with machine gun fire, killing many of the inhabitants. The remaining villagers were then gathered in one place and murdered in cold blood, their bodies abused, while a number of the women were raped and then killed. One of the survivors, 12 years old at the time, recalled the slaughter of his family. They took us out one after the other, shot an old man, and when one of his daughters cried, she was shot too. Then they called my brother Muhammad and shot him in front of us, and when my mother yelled, bending over him, carrying my little sister Hudra in her hands, still breastfeeding her, they shot her too. The grandson of a woman who survived the attack on the large village of Bassa described the events that took place. My maternal grandmother was a teenager when Israeli troops entered Bassa and ordered all the young men to be lined up and executed in front of one of the churches. My grandmother watched as 2 of her brothers, one 21, the other 22, and recently married, were executed by the Israeli soldiers. Let's look at the percent of Jews in Palestine from the late 19th century through to the founding of Israel. So you see less than 10%, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10%, and then it goes up. Of course, it's slowly creeping up, and then after the British abandoned the UN, allowed this, had this resolution, and the Jews basically took over a bunch of stuff, it goes massively up. Now, also, there were, and this is something that when you study history is always kind of jaw-dropping, there were native Palestinian Jews who'd lived peacefully among Arabs for centuries. And they also opposed this new movement, seeing it as a threat to the stability of the region. There had been only one small conflict between Arabs and Jews since the 11th century. Some native Jews were even assassinated by Jewish militias for trying to undermine the Zionist movement, right? So you got a bunch of Jews living in Palestine peacefully with the Arabs, and they're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Don't come here with your promised land stuff because, you know, we're getting along fine, and we have for hundreds and hundreds of years. So the idea that the Jews and the Arabs can't coexist peacefully is falsified, is proven as false by centuries of peaceful coexistence history. A chilling quote from the book states, "There is justification for killing babies if it is clear that they will grow up to harm us, and in such a situation, they may be harmed deliberately and not only during combat with adults." And generally, when you're talking about baby murder, it may be time to take a pause in your movement, but that has not happened to some, of course, of the rabbis. So beginning in 1916, as Britain's resources were nearing exhaustion while fighting the Central Powers in World War I, it became apparent that new forces needed to join the Allies for the war to be won by England and France. British politicians realized that both the money and political influence of Jews were necessary to get America and Russia into the war. So they decided to help the Zionist movement establish their Jewish homeland. Right? So this is important. And this, if you read up on Hitler, a crazy evil lunatic, but again, it's important to understand the enemies so that you know what they want, so that you can try and find some way to resolve the dispute. This is what Hitler called the stab in the back, and was one of the reasons why he became such an anti-Semite. The ideology that produced the 1948 ethnic cleansing is one that keeps refugees in their camps today, discriminates against Palestinians inside Israel and oppresses those under occupation in the West Bank and imprisonment in the Gaza Strip. Seen from that perspective, a two-state solution is a small lid trying to cover a huge boiling pot, and whenever it is put on, it drowns. The resolution of a conflict can only occur when such a lid can be put firmly on the past and bring its horrors and evils to a close. However, if the horrors committed by the Nazis continue to live on in the minds of the Jews, how can we expect Palestinians to forget what was done to them? I'm not equating the Jews with the Nazis, but from the standpoint of the victims, there are similarities. Adjusted for inflation, the United States has provided Israel with over $250 billion, $233.7 billion since the country was founded in 1948, making it the largest recipient of U.S. economic and military assistance since World War II. On average, Israel annually receives more than $4.3 billion in foreign assistance, about 2% of Israel's GDP. In recent years, military aid accounts for 75% of taxpayer money sent to Israel. You can't morally force people to... Anyway. U.S. support for Israel has been one of the main drivers behind Muslim hostility towards Americans. In his letter to America, Osama bin Laden claimed that this is one of the main reasons behind the 9/11 attack. He wrote, "The British handed over Palestine with your help and your support to the Jews who have occupied it for more than 50 years. Years overflowing with oppression, tyranny, crimes, killing, expulsion, destruction, and devastation. The creation and continuation of Israel is one of the greatest crimes, and you are the leaders of its criminals." This was Osama bin Laden's letter to America.